Welcome to the Salt Strong Podcast, disrupting fishing entertainment as you know it. Prepare to laugh. Prepare to get to know fishing legends in a whole new and unfiltered way. And on occasion, you might even learn a thing or two about fishing. Here's your host, Joe Simons. Like diamonds.
Hello, Salt Strong Nation. Joe Simons. Like diamonds, back again. We're talking about the best snook fishing book ever written, in our opinion. And we're going to do a review on this and talk about some of our favorite tips. Luke, you're here with me. For those of you listening, Luke is here. And we're talking about the Snook Book by none other than Frank Sargeant, a guy that we've talked about a lot. Luke, what's the rule? The old 90?
The old 90-10. Yeah, 90-10. He's the one that, it's a principle that's applied across everything. But he was at least the first that I saw that applied it to fishing. And it's really been an eye-opener for us and for a lot of our members on just how true that is and how we always need to be thinking of it, really for all species. And today we're also going to focus on snook. One of my personal favorites. They're just a blast. It's like a bass on steroids for those of us who kind of grew up bass fishing, transitioning into saltwater. Snook is pretty awesome animal, and so it's gonna be a fun one just to dissect this book and just explain some. It was written a little bit a while ago before some of the newer gear and equipment has been introduced. So we're going to kind of tell you about the book and then help you bridge the time gap from when it was written to now.
Yeah, but some of the best tactics in here that we're going to cover in the Snook Book by Frank Sargeant are things that are evergreen, where he talks about exactly where you want to go find snook on the beaches, exactly the right tide that you want to target snook on different types of areas, from oyster bars to inlets and passes, et cetera. There is just some phenomenal info in here. I highly encourage you to go get the book. You can find these, same one on Amazon, but we're going to cover some of our favorite chapters in here. And also share some of our personal snook tactics also. And by the way, if you don't know what the 90-10 rule is, if you're kind of scratching your head, Frank opened up a couple of his books. He's got the Snook Book, the Tarpon Book, the Redfish Book, the Trout Book, and a few others. And he opens up quite a few of these books with a quote basically saying that in all the research and all the fishing he's done, that 90% of all feeding fish at any given time can be found in just 10% of any area. And that applies for inshore fishing. It applies for offshore fishing, right? I mean, there's this massive ocean, right? And usually you find the marlin or the wahoo, the kingfish, whatever it is, they're all kind of in one area when you find them. It's the same with this. And he actually gives a couple tactics in here about snook. He's like, if you're on the beach and you catch a snook, go right back to the place you hooked it. There's probably going to be 5 or 6 or 50 more. They're always roaming around in schools. So we're going to go through some of these tips here. And he does a great job also about talking about both coasts. I mean, this is primarily Florida. He does talk a little bit about Texas, talks a little bit about even South America. I think there's a chapter dedicated to it. But he talks about both coasts because they are different. And he also talks about live bait and artificial lures. I know he's got a kind of a love, just like we do, for artificial lures. There's something cool about going out there, not needing the lug around your cast net and keeping bait alive, and to be able to fool a snook to bite something that is 100% artificial and fake. Kind of cool. Let's see here. Where do we want to start? So he kicks off the whole book talking about where to find the fish. It's very similar to what we did with Captain C. Richardson and the Snook Mastery course. Because if you can't find them, the lures or the bait, even the tides, none of that stuff really matter as much if you don't know where the fish are going to be at any given time, which is, really the main focus of our Insider Club, right, Luke?
Absolutely, yeah. And it's really the one thing, if done properly, everything else doesn't really matter quite as much too. So if you're on the fish, you can go catch fish consistently, even if you don't have like the perfect equipment, even the right lure in many cases. That as long as you find them in most days, some days they're super picky, but in most cases, they're really not super picky. So it just comes down to just finding the fish and then having some sort of lure or live bait, right? That covers the specific zone that they're feeding in, right? That 90-10 zone. As long as you can identify that zone, everything else is easier.
Yep. So he kicks off this entire book with the most important part, which is where to find the fish. And this is an NOAA, a NOAA chart. So his whole point, and of course, we don't need that anymore. We had this on Smart Fishing Tides for you insider members where we got the sonar. And this is not top spot maps. This is like literally looking at the NOAA maps, and he's really focused on sonar. And he talks here, he's like, my favorite thing to look for are, let's see, if you note depths of 5 feet right against the shore, approaching a junction of 2 creeks or a creek and a river, you can bet there will be line setters, aka snooks, hanging around. So that's small creeks feeding out of large bays. So he's looking, once again, I mean, he literally gives you a blueprint here. Anything depths of 5 feet right against a shore, approaching a junction of 2 creeks or a creek and a river, that is one of my favorite places to find them. And he also says those small creeks on falling tides, because the current there will be intense, pulling the bait out with it. Look particularly for bay mouths with deep cuts in them, 6 feet or greater in the actual bay mouths, because that indicates the force of the current there has scoured out the area. Strong water flow attracts snook. And this is really how it kicks off the book. And this is really kind of the foundation of using, nowadays it's online maps and sonar, which we have once again at smartfishingtides.com for all of our insider members. And you can go find these exact types of spots in your area without having to look around a big NOAA chart. It is funny. I mean, we're nothing has really changed except the technology has altered how we view some of this stuff. But I mean, this is the entire focus of the very first 2 chapters is how to find the spots and how to use maps to find the 90-10 zone. Pretty cool.
Yeah. Nowadays, again, the map part is much easier. And as long as you know the type of thing to look for, like in this case, he mentioned the creeks, right? That creeks with depth, water depth, it basically means that a turning creek where the water's hitting a side and it's digging it out, and that's going to be a deep trough with current, and it's guaranteed going to be structured because all the tree roots, grass roots, whatever's there is going to be sticking out. So you have current, you have structure, and then you're obviously going to have bait fish flowing through. That's a recipe for success. That's what we see work continuously. And that's what we reference in that Snook Mastery course too, and as well as the insider stuff. It's just find the current flow, make sure there's structure, and then that's really the recipe.
So you're gonna love this one. And Frank, man, what a visionary. So his second favorite thing to look for when he's on the water is, guess what, Luke? Potholes.
Oh, potholes.
Potholes on the flats. And he says the one thing charts don't do yet, he actually says the word yet, is to show individual potholes in the flats where snook might hang out. These holes, often only 10 feet across, are usually too small to show on a chart, but you can draw these in yourself as you learn them, eventually developing your own specialized chart that suits your fishing style. He says, don't be too sure that these potholes won't show up on charts soon, though. That's pretty funny.
Yeah. Now Google, I mean, a 10-foot pothole is easily found. You can even see them probably as low as like 2 or 3 feet in diameter. So that's the online maps, particularly Google Earth, Google Being is good, MapQuest. They are a tremendous resource for those who just know how to use them. And again, if you don't, the Insider Club comes with the Finding Spots Mastery course. And that goes through everything, all the pros and cons on exactly how to use those map systems. It is a total game changer as far as just consistently finding fish.
It changes everything. And we have, 10% of our members are full-time guys. I mean, men and women who have a full captain's license, 6-ton captain's license. And we've had countless people who have said that they have learned a ton from that one course, the Finding Spots Mastery course. It's the stuff that you're not seeing out there on YouTube. It is like in-depth ninja tactics using all the maps, because even though a lot of us gravitate towards Google, it's probably the most well-known. There's some really cool nuances with some of the other free satellite maps as well. That was one of my favorite parts about it, is like looking at stuff at MapQuest and some of the other ones had. It's like, whoa, there's some really cool things that you can see both now and even historically to learn about the area. He goes into I skipped a chapter because it's some stuff that's not really related on the tackle side. We'll go into some more tackle in a little bit, but it talks about if you're beginning out and you really like kids, anyone, you just want to get on some snook, the easiest way is shrimp, live shrimp. And he says, for starters, always buy the selects or the jumbos. I would always get the largest hand-picked shrimp available. They survive better. They're easier to cast because they're bigger versus, trying to cast this little small shrimp for a kid. I mean, it's not going to go anywhere. He had a cool, interesting tip here. Where is it? In very hot weather, the baits will stay alive better if you set the bucket half full of water inside your ice chest. Shrimp can't stand much fresh water and can't take any chlorine, which most commercial ice frequently contains chlorine. It also says you can keep your shrimp alive for up to a week by putting them in alternating layers of wet newspaper and ice in an ice chest. Very interesting. So he says, especially his reference was, a lot of times they'll go down in the Everglades or some places that were on a houseboat or a mothership, and you can keep your shrimp alive for up to a week by putting them in alternating layers of wet newspaper and ice in an ice chest. Very, very interesting. Yeah, he also makes what's that?
I'll say another tip for keeping bait alive in the hot summer. It's just more and more important now is you can just freeze water bottles or even Ziploc bags and just freeze it full of, obviously put water in it, freeze it, and then you can put it in your live well. And now you have that coolness without letting that fresh water with chlorine get into the tank to mess it up. So that way you get the coldness without having the negative impacts of the fresh water getting in the live well.
Yep. In terms of actually rigging and fishing the shrimp, he goes on multiple times to say the best way to fish live shrimp is unweighted, aka free lined, on spinning gear and a lightweight hook. The unweighted bait allows a very natural presentation. Snook do not like a shrimp anchored to the bottom with a heavy lead. Clearly, we've all caught fish with that kind of rig where you have a lead and it's just kind of hanging off, floating off the bottom. But we're talking about like catching trophy snook consistently. And I would agree with that. I think the other one would be maybe a popping cork is great for kids, helps them cast a little bit better. And you can obviously, see it a little bit more visual. That would be the only other thing. He does talk about the popping cork there, put down a foot to 3 feet, depending on the depth that you're fishing in. But he says, by and large, free lining it, which is another reason you want to get the jumbo shrimp on a lightweight small hook, is probably one of the best ways if you're using shrimp. Thoughts, Luke?
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, snook are designed to feed upward. And so, they obviously they will feed on the bottom, but they definitely are designed to kind of strike up, which is why topwater is so much fun. And in the free line shrimp would definitely be the way to go.
Yep. The other two that he really focuses on are sardines and pinfish. We won't talk too much about them. We'll talk about them a little bit later in here. But pinfish, aka the original snook candy. Sardines and pinfish are two that he absolutely loves behind the shrimp. You're going to use them in a little bit different situations, which once again we'll talk about in a little bit. Now, I love the fact, if you can't read my highlighting here, it says, skip your lure to the fish. He has an entire chapter about casting. Yes, about casting. You think you're going to read a book and it's going to be all about the tactics and where to find them, which this thing is loaded full of them, but it goes back to the basics. It's just like golf. It's cool to be able to drive the ball 300 yards, but if you can't sink a putt, your scores are going to suffer. And it's the same with fishing, right? We see it all the time with friends, with people on our boat, people we fish with. I'm constantly trying to get better. Luke's, one of the best casters I fished with, and it can make or break you. I mean, who can cast the most accurate and a lot of times the furthest, which he talks about as well, are the people who can make accurate and consistent casts. And he says, literally talks about here a whole chapter. We're still talking about skipping artificials here on the next page about practicing skipping, being able to get it under the mangroves. Talks a ton about the mangroves. I mean, these fish, and for the most part, aren't hanging 10 feet away from the mangrove line, especially at high tide. They're way up in there. And we've caught, you had one in Marco recently, right? Luke, skipping underneath the mangrove.
It was a beast. It got away though. I'm still upset about that, but it was a beast. Yeah. And in norm, snook are super structure oriented, but even potholes, right? You think of a flat with potholes as not being structured, but that pothole itself is structured. That's why when they're on the flats, they're almost always in a pothole. But a consistent way to get them is to fish the mangroves or fish in docks, and they're pretty much always going to be right up against the structure. That's where they feel safest. They use it to help ambush their prey, and whoever can get their baits or lures as close as possible to that structure is going to catch the most fish. It's science. And so, yeah, casting is crucial. It is absolutely, even if you're using live bait, casting is crucial, but it's even more important for artificial lures, because now you're in 100% control of making sure exactly where that lure is at any given time.
Yep. Moving on to chapter 6, wading the flats. The higher up you get, the better the fish can see you. So what's the answer? It's to get out of the boat and get lower. And I love this. He says, yeah, I know you paid 20 grand to buy that high-tech foam cord, 600-pound wonder, and you want to fish up on the nice, clean, non-skid decks, not down there in the mud and stingrays. But if you really want to catch the big fish, you've got to get out of the boat sometimes. And where and when to wade. On rising water, for example, you may want to find a mangrove shoreline with grass abutting. On the fall, you may look for holes near points where eddies will form, or perhaps channel edges and bay outflows. Move slowly, keep your rod low to the water. Once again, I mean, he's trying to be as low profile as possible. So move slowly, keep your rod low to the water, and don't move at all when a fish comes close following your lure. This was an interesting, although white clothes are most comfortable in hot, sunny weather, darker shades are less visible to the fish and less unnatural in the usual mangrove environment. Got me thinking about what I'm wearing out there now.
Yeah, it just depends on where the angle, right? It's trying to think of the backdrop. If you have trees behind you, then that's the case. But if you're on a flat, then the clouds will be behind you. So generally the lighter stuff will be better then.
Yep. This is one, because we got that one video where the snook crushed that crab, and he has a whole paragraph about this. When in wading in particular, when wading in the shallows and you see these snook up there prowling really shallow, they're prowling for crustaceans, and they'll never turn down a crab if you can get it in front of its face. Of course, you had to have live crabs on you, which is a little bit tougher when you're wading, or some of these what are the chase baits and one of the other ones that are pretty cool.
Yeah, I've still never. I still haven't caught a snook on those. I'm sure they'll eat them. I just have not had any luck yet. They're just tougher to cast. Because with all the, they make them so realistic, which is great, but they have all the little legs and extremities sticking out of there, and that just catches the wind, right? So it's a small little crab lure with those extremities, and at least in my opinion, that it does more harm than good. So I just prefer like the power prawn, something like that, a shrimp lure that can cast. It doesn't have all those unneeded extremities. It can cast really far. It looks natural still. So for that reason, I don't use all those lures with all the crazy stuff sticking out of them.
Yeah, I take a power prawn, a little Dr. Juice all day long. All right, chapter 7, fine and far away. Some 200 years ago, Isaac Walton admonished his readers that at times it was necessary to fish fine and far away. That advice, originally fashioned for finicky freshwater trout, is becoming more and more appropriate for inshore saltwater anglers as the pressure on the flat species grows and the fish become ever more wary of the wiles of us anglers. Guess what this one's all about, Luke? Casting. Now, this book was written quite some time ago, and so we'll talk about this next. So he has a whole 2 paragraphs on filling your spool. It's all about distance casting. And so you want to go light. And he also talks about light in terms of now we're using braid, the diameter. And he says, in fact, a spool filled to within 1/8 inch or less of the rim is probably the single most important factor in adding distance with a spinning reel. And that was with mono. What do you think with braid?
Yeah, so I actually did a test, and at least when I spool now with braid, the 1/8 it's kind of the more known thing, but again, that was said with mono. So I do about half that. So I do about 1/16. So if you can see this, This is a reel I just spooled up. There's very little gap in between. We're talking about the gap between the outside of the line and then the rim of the reel. Like how much gap is there? So an eighth is kind of what it was, and now I see with braid, you can definitely get away with much less. So I just know as that gap decreases, your distance is going to increase, right? Your casting distance is going to grow, but your risk of wind knots is going to increase as well. So that's the pro, the con. If you do too much, you're gonna get wind knots. Too little, you're gonna lose distance. And so usually, like at least for me, it's like about a 1/16 of an inch gap for braid. But again, it doesn't have to be exactly that. And also, the thinner the better, as he mentioned. But just going I did a test on Power Pro. So I did a 20-pound Power Pro, which I used to use because I thought that I would need it. And I did on the same rod, same reel. Same everything except for the line. I did a 10-pound Power Pro, and the 10-pound absolutely crushed the 20-pound. It was around 20% better casting just by going down to a thinner line. And there's really no better way to guarantee you'll catch more fish than to cast further. Obviously, you still need to have the power, and so that's why a good knot with light line is going to be the winner in most cases.
That's good. The next chapter is all about beach fishing. This is one of my favorites. And this is the time, right? Really, end of April, May, it starts happening depending on where you live in Florida. But right now, this is it. And he gives some really, really cool tips on here. So it says the fish, the snook, are in the surf for one reason and one reason only: to find food. And they feed most actively, in my experience, on rising water. As you'd expect, the rise brings crabs and sand fleas out of their holes. So that makes sense, right? As the water's coming up, now you have all these crabs and these sand fleas are all coming out. And that puts a lot of small fish up high on the beach where they're easily pinned by a rushing snook. And rising water at dusk, dawn, or after dark is particularly good. And he has a whole chapter about fishing at night, especially if the annual shoreward migration of blue crabs coincides as it does through much of the summer. So that paragraph right there is worth the price of admission. That is awesome. So I'll read it again. They feed most actively on rising water. This is for the beach. As you'd expect, the rise brings crabs and sand fleas out of their holes and puts a lot of small fish up high on the beach where they're easily pinned by snook. Rising water at dusk, dawn, or after dark is particularly good, especially if the annual shoreward migration of blue crabs coincides. Now, this next statement is money, and it's proven to be true every time I go fishing on the beach. Snook could be anywhere along the beach, but your numbers skyrocket when you fish within 400 yards of a pass or inlet. So your numbers skyrocket if you're within 400 yards of a pass or an inlet. And he does say when you see one snook along the beach, there are usually always more. These fish tend to roam in loosely scattered schools that may spread out over a couple hundred yards of beach, or where anywhere there's a bar or a rock pile for them to center in on. Luke, what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, that's spot on. Right. So snook are, they're very structure oriented. They like current. So the points of an inlet or a pass, that's going to have the moving water. There's going to be a lot more food. And so that's going to just increase the odds of fish. However, you can still just go to a beach that's a long ways off from an inlet, and there's going to be snook patrolling. There just won't be nearly as many. And even going out on clear days, just go walking the beach. It's fun just to watch them and see what they're doing. And the tip on more than one, sometimes there are singles, but more often than not, there's going to be packs of them. And sometimes they're 4 to 5, sometimes they're 50 or more. So you can sometimes just see a gray cloud kind of moving down the beach, and that's when it's pretty much guaranteed hookup. And it's just so much fun, and they're going to be right along the shoreline. As mentioned, in many cases, if your feet are in the water, you're too deep. So stay off the water. Those fish, especially on the rising tide, as was mentioned, they're going to be feeding right along that shoreline. And so I'm usually like 5-10 feet off the shoreline and making angles, casting at an angle just to cover that ledge, cover right up against the shore break.
That's the number one mistake people make, especially, there's a lot of Northerners. We love Northerners. they come down and they want to catch their first snook. They're surf anglers, and they bring their 12-foot surf rods and their New England clam chowder, and they're wondering why they're not catching anything, because they're out there up to their nipples trying to cast out a mile, and the snook are all behind them. And he actually says many times you'll see snook close enough to touch with your rod tip from the beach. The snook are likely to be within 20 to 50 feet of the beach, where the air is breaking waves, keep the water stirred into a slight murk, and where they can better ambush bait fish tossed around in the undertow. The guy who makes 300-foot cast out beyond the bar is not going to be showing his lure to any snook, although he might hook a Spanish mackerel or maybe even a tarpon. The fish are usually looking towards the beach, or at least parallel to it, rather than out towards the open water. Luke kind of mentioned this because he had a whole two paragraphs here on casting. Knowing that, once again, the fish are usually looking towards the beach or at least parallel to it. Whatever lure you're using, the casting pattern should begin completely parallel to the sand, falling in water just deep enough to float a fish, maybe a foot or even less. Make the retrieve right down the beach line. If that doesn't get a hit, drop the next one about 4 feet further, and then try that again until you fan the entire area out towards the green bar, and then do it all over again. And then he says, when you do stick a fish, come right back to the spot where you got the strike when the battle ends. Often, whatever held that first fish will attract others, and you can hook a half dozen more without ever moving. I thought that was a great tip here.
Yeah, and in many cases, there's not going to be structure as well. And so those fish are usually on the move. Like if you just sit there and watch, even if you're just relaxing in the water, in many cases, the snook are coming to you. And they're almost always all going in the same direction. And so once you see a fish going a certain way, just know that that's going to be the case for the rest of them, at least in most situations. And yeah, as Joe said, like the shallower they are, the more likely they're there to feed. Like they're not super comfortable in shallow water as far as their own safety is concerned, but that's where the food is. So in many cases, if you see a snook up there, if you see 5 snook, go for whichever one's shallowest, because that one it's primed and ready to eat.
Mm-hmm.
Or to watch it. It's such a thrilling situation to get those snook to slam a lure or bait fish.
Oh yeah. Speaking of beaches, pass fishing techniques. So I mentioned earlier, he talks in here about using a bucktail, white bucktail jig. It's been used forever to catch snook and passes and in cuts along the beach. But I told you earlier, we talked a little bit about pinfish. He says one of my favorite ways for passes is to float a live pinfish through the deepest sections of the pass, keeping the bait just off the bottom and just clear the rocks that usually litter the spots where the snook gather. This is usually an outgoing tide fishery with boats drifting along directly above their baits to avoid snagging. You could put just enough weight to keep the line down. Obviously, it's going to depend on how hard that current is running. He talks about the jigs again, even just straight up popping them off the bottom, and then talks about moon phases. So this is interesting. Biologists running plankton nets around spawning passes have noted a definite increase in the number of snook eggs released in the 3 days on either side of the new and full moon. So I'm going to say that again. A definite increase of the number of snook eggs released in the 3 days on either side of the new and full moons. And this tells the angler that the time to seek snook in the passes is on the stronger moon phases. Probably the best single fishing period in most spawning months is the night of the full moon. The day after the full moon can also be good, but not quite as strong as the night. So this is, once again, this is for passes in the spawning period. Probably the single best fishing period in most spawning months is the night of the full moon. Interesting. What do you think, Luke?
Yeah, I mean, that's it's going to have the most tidal flow. It's going to have the currents, and it's going to be light enough for fish to see and ambush prey.
Yep.
So yeah, so it makes sense.
So spends a whole section on just topwater, and the old spook still at it. Of course, we have a new topwater lure we've been developing, kind of based on some of the popular ones like the spook. We took some of the best features of some of the best topwaters. Called the Moonwalker. Be for insiders only. it probably at least for the rest of this year, but he spent a whole 3 pages just talking about topwater lures. And usually it's going to be in the twilight, right? It's going to be that morning and when the sun's setting, and of course at nighttime. He spends a whole chapter here towards the end just about fishing at night. That, especially if you're on some of he talks about the piers and those snook are down there, and that is one of the easiest times. It's the less pressure, and they're feeding. I mean, these things are feeding at night. I mean, our boy there, Captain Dave, the Mad Snooker in Sarasota, that's all he does. He is like 100%. His charters are at nighttime, and he kills it. I think he's probably broken the record for the most snook caught. We had him on the podcast. We'll make sure to put a link to that. It was a fascinating podcast. Was it 30,000 snook or something? It was some.
Yeah, it was a crazy.
Might have been 300,000. It was something with many zeros. It was nuts.
Yeah, he's very detailed. He tracks everything, and just going out at night. He saves a lot of money on sunscreen too.
Yeah, he certainly does. All right, so the next 2 chapters, I'm going to save some of this because I want to do this again. We'd love to hear your feedback on it. But he then starts talking about the fall migration and winter migration. I want to save this part really just for the summer, since that's the season that we're in. And he does, as I said, talk about nighttime fishing. And that's probably one of his favorites. It's a whole chapter on night stalkers. And he says snook are night stalkers. They feed much more actively after the sun goes down. And for those willing to brave a little bit of bug bites and some unseen snags and maybe some invisible backlashes, night snooking can be incredibly productive. And I completely agree. Mad Snooker's proof of it. We love it. Even on vacation, that's a great time to, if the kids and the spouse is in bed, or if, don't have that, and, everyone else is out partying or whatever it is. I mean, one of the best times is to walk along the beach or hit some of those little small bridges or even causeways, jetties. Obviously, you just want to be super careful. Tell everyone where you are, because that is when some accidents can happen too, and you slip or break an ankle or whatever it is. So I would preface it with safety first to make sure someone knows where you are. Have a flashlight, have a phone. But that is some of you'll just see some crazy stuff, especially when the water's moving. And whether you got shrimp coming out or whatever bait it is, and the snook are just hammering this stuff, and you can throw topwaters out there. There's just nothing like it.
Yeah, it's a fun deal. As Joe said, it's the risk is elevated, so just be safe, especially if you're in like kayaks or even boats. It's just tougher to navigate. But be safe. But also, you can just go from shore, right? Go from any local pier. A lot of public docks have lights on them, and bridges. Those bridge lights. Those snook will just stack up right on the edge of that light, and they're picking off fish. And it's just a great time to go catch them.
Yep. So I hope you guys like this. Hopefully it was as helpful. There's kind of 3 next steps if you want to learn how to catch a whole lot more snook. One is go to Amazon, or we'll put a link in the show notes to get the Snook Book at the lowest price from our friend there, Frank Sargeant. So we'll put, once again, in the show notes to get that. Number 2 is to buy the Snook Mastery course. That was a proprietary course we did with Captain C. Richardson. Still, people are buying that every single day now. A really amazing course of all CA's best tactics. We'll put links on that. It's all at saltstrom.com. And the final piece, if you want updated, like real time on the water reports and trends to get you in that 90-10 zone all year long, even in the fall and the winter, but especially right now, just because it's the present moment. And this is, a lot of vacation time and a little bit more time to go out there and fish. And the snook are very active. Join us in the Insider Club. It is the only fishing club in America that guarantees you will catch more snook or you get your money back. And of course, now that we've added on all this tackle, some proprietary, some with some of the biggest names out there, and some really, really nice discounts for our member, it's a no-brainer. We have some members who've spent now $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 just on the tackle alone. And when you're talking up to 20% off everything, they're paying for their membership 10x. Not to mention all the tips and tactics and the weekend trends and the weekend smart fishing report we do every single week. Now we have live coaching calls And of course, the amazing community. There's I think we just hit 23,000 members now in the Insider Club, and just an amazing online community that's broken down by region. And now I saw Nick, our developer, just created what is it called? Like a weekly digest, or I guess you could even get daily if you wanted to, but weekly is, I think, is kind of the default, where every week just kind of seeing all the fishing reports that are happening in your area. So you get to pick your little region and kind of get to see everything. It is, it's like having a fishing guide in your back pocket. Really, really cool. So I would highly, highly encourage you to come join us. And that's at saltstrong.com. Up at the top, you'll see a little button that says join the Insider Club. We would love to have you in there. It's where we spend all of our time. It's where we put all our best content. A lot of this stuff we put out there on YouTube, that's the free stuff. It's good, but we save the very best. We have more content that does not exist out there publicly that you can't see. It's behind the paywall, if you will. So we save the very best, especially the trends and the real-time data, the stuff that's working right now. And then we're updating every single day, every single week, all year long. So come join us in the club. You will not be disappointed. You will catch more fish, and you will save time, and you'll meet some great friends too. That's another really cool aspect of it, is all the friendships that we've met and people we've been able to go fish with. And we're starting to do meetups again. It's been really, really cool.
Yeah. And so if you like catching snook, redfish, sea trout, flounder, on an annual basis throughout all the seasons, and then the seasonal stuff we cover as well, there's nothing else like it. The Insider Club is literally the best. It's the best resource for consistently catching inshore fish. It's so good that we put an entire year guarantee. So we guarantee the entire duration of your membership. And so if somehow at any point in that time, if you don't think it's the best purchase you've ever made for fishing, just let us know and we'll give you a refund. It's all the risk is on us. We know you're going to like it. So we just want to make sure that we put all the risk on our shoulders, and to just let us prove what we're saying is true. We believe you're going to love it. And you can pass that knowledge down to your kids, grandkids, and throughout your whole family. So it's can't stress enough just the importance of just giving it a shot.
Yeah, even if you don't get to fish as much as you want, right? Because we've met just in person. We met a member here from up north, meaning Michigan. We have in Ohio, Indiana. We had a lot of these members that either have second homes or what's it called, the house swapping, and I'm blanking on the name. What's it called when you get in timeshare? They have timeshares, or just vacation here once or twice a year. The member that we met, he comes down 3, maybe 4 times max to Florida, and he just wants to maximize his time. He's like, this is the best investment I have ever spent on fishing, because I get here and I know where the fish are. I already have like an upper hand. I don't have to spend my first 4 days just trying to figure out the area. I'm doing all that kind of pre-fishing inside the community, and by watching the reports before the wheels touch down on the tarmac. So great, even if you don't get to fish as much as you want. And in fact, I would say that's probably who needs it the most, are people that don't get to fish as much as you want, which is most of us. And that means you probably value your time and you want to maximize your precious fishing time. It's an absolute no-brainer to come join us in the club. And for you current members, I know a lot of you members listen to the podcast. Thank you so much. You are the foundation of this entire company, and you're our family. We talk about it. We pray about you every single meeting that we have, and truly do. I mean, we live to support you guys. So we appreciate you big time, and so pumped. I mean, we now had members who have renewed now 5 years in a row, because we started this a little over 5 years ago. So we now have these 5-year members, which is really, really cool. We're trying to come up with some cool gifts to really recognize and reward the members who were around for that long. It's been really, really neat.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been awesome. In the community section, everybody's posting reports, and it's a private community too. So they're actually helpful reports. It's not like Facebook where it's like, hey, look at this cool fish and the background's all blurred out. They're actually sharing helpful tips, and it's just been a give take. So as we said, it's give it a shot. You have nothing to lose. The risk is all nuts to actually live up to what we're saying, and we will. Just give it a shot.
Amen. Cool, guys. We appreciate you. Frank Sargeant, I've talked to you a couple times in the past, even on the phone. We chatted. Thank you. If you're listening to this or watching this, thank you so much for all the great content. I mean, you were really a pioneer. You inspired Luke and I to do a lot of what we've done. And I hope you don't mind sharing, just a couple little segments out of this book. And I encourage you, if you like reading like I do, go buy all of his books. I mean, they are truly phenomenal. Like I said, I started with the snook and then redfish, trout, and then tarpon. There's a couple other ones too. Like he has some region specific ones that are great. But I would start with the three for sure: snook, redfish, and trout. Those things are awesome. So we'll put links to them in the show notes, and we will talk to you guys on the next episode. Peace. We out.
See ya.
'Cause fishing, it's in my soul, it was pain.